Okay, Professor Tootle, you and I are both sick, but we're online, so we're not contagion anybody. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
Yeah,
Everything's
okay.
good. Yeah, feeling. I'm on definitely on the mend. That's for sure.
All right. Well, I hope I am too. But if I pause for a Robitussin cough break, then you'll know what I'm. Then that's a non-paid commercial, by the way. Somehow we got to get Robitussin to pay for this. All
Yeah.
right. Excited about this conversation because you have no idea what we're talking about, and you may have seen 10 minutes ago when I put the headline on, but that was literally 10 minutes ago.
Haven't even
I'm
seen the
telling you,
headline.
yeah, you're going to be able to give some really good insight into America. But before we talk about America, I'd like you to, whatever's not personal, because, this is obviously online and there may have been a personal element or two. I would like you to get in the right mindset and just in general, broad brush, talk about your Thanksgiving post of a week or so ago, where you just paused and said, there's so much to be thankful for, and there, yes, I've got problems, and other people have problems. I don't want to steal your thunder, but it was a really almost prose. It was almost poetry. It was a really beautiful post about kind of your life and all the good things in it and what we should be thinking about this type of season. And I don't want to put my kind of what I heard from it, but can you just talk a little bit about your thoughts on personal, and not necessarily you, but us as an individual human beings, what we should be thankful for, how we should provide grace, how we should provide forgiveness and redemption. How are we as humans in America today? I'm just trying to get you in the right mode to then talk about America. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I don't remember. I don't remember what I wrote. I remember that I liked it, and every year on Thanksgiving it sort of pops up again. I was I remember when I wrote it, I was hearing my kids fighting, and I was thinking about how um, the things we think of as complications, relationships with other people, um, going to church, going to work, um, uh, the complicated relationships we have with our friends and our families. Those are the things that give your life depth and richness. And they're not what we're supposed to be escaping from, you know. Uh, and I guess I just have a very deep gratitude for all of the people um, who have uh, invested in me. Um, and when you're trying to explain, especially when I mean, this is why I write, it's incoherent when I try to talk. But when you try to explain to your kids death, or why are we alive, or why do we do anything, it forces you to reflect on those things. And this will often prompt um, conversations that lead to gratitude. But when you're thinking about like what you're grateful for, it's none of it is perfect. None of these relationships are perfect. None of them, and none of them exist in the abstract. They all live and breathe in the real world. And I guess I'm more interested in finding out, like, what did you take from it? But I'm, I just sort of sat down and wrote a bunch of stuff. And
yeah,
I never
well,
know what someone else is going to take out of it. I just sort of run it up the flagpole and see who salutes.
it's yeah, I thought so much of it that I wanted to do a whole show about America on it today. So we'll get to some of that. Yeah, I can't say it's like written by the hand of God. It wasn't that melodramatic, but it was really pretty beautiful on how to what you're talking about. How to you said when your kids are, yeah, ask a question and then you go a little deeper and then you basically just got down to the point of my job, or what I did, my desire, and I'm working hard at it, is just to pour out love into people, and just and you're the best hugger we've ever met. There's two others that are close to you, but you're bigger than they are, so you win.
Yeah.
And your single like minded goal, and it's from a Facebook post, so I don't want to be
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
dramatic, but your goal in life is to pour love into others that are in your life, and not only for gratefulness, but it's the right thing to do. Or what else is more important than that? I mean, yeah, I can get a degree or an award or make money or a house or something. I mean, those are all kind of important, but what's more important? And you kind of outlined to us a life's mission that I just thought was beautiful.
Well, I get, and there are a couple of people who have really influenced me over the years, and I mentioned some of my professors, but one guy, I wish I could even remember what his name was. I went to Cal Poly, and they used to make you, I don't know if they still do, make you take science and engineering and ag classes, because it's a polytechnic. And I remember I took this class called Agriculture in American Life, and it was, pretty easy. It was a pretty easy class, and I enjoyed it. But the professor was retiring, and I'll never forget what he said when we were leaving the class, and I won't do justice to it, but he just sort of said, like, we're all going to die. And I just happened to be the right age to maybe think about that for the first time. I was probably 21, 22 years old. And I never really thought about what I'm going to leave behind when I die. But then he also talked about getting old. And now that, because this was a professor who was about to retire, and he said, you should start thinking right now about the kind of life you want to look back on, and you should live your life in that way. Think about what kind of memories do you want to look back on, and then you'll know what to do when you have a question. I was thinking about that. One of my friends who's been through a lot politically is Congressman Valadao, and he recently won re-election. And when he had a very difficult decision, I shouldn't say, I don't know if it was difficult. I don't know if he strained, but he really thought about, I have kids. What, and I have to, I have to be able to, like, look my kids in the eye, and tell them, like, I'm your dad. And those sorts of things will keep you straight, and at least keep you from being petty, going for the quick, short-term, easier route. But what unfolds, now that I've got a bunch of gray hair and I'm old and all that, is now looking back on the last 25, 30 years or something, I kind of found that, like, those decisions that at the time seemed hard actually made my life easier, because they didn't leave me with a bunch of burdens that I had to carry through life. So, like, doing the right thing seems like the hard thing to do in the moment, but every time I consciously chose to do the right thing, in the long run, it always made my life easier, because you have to live with yourself every day. But then the other thing is, like, forgiving yourself, and forgiving others is also important, because you realize all the times when you did, make a mistake, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and the only thing that could even allow you to keep moving on in life is the grace of others who just say, look, like, don't worry about it. Like, I get it. You had a bad day, and I forgive you, and you need to forgive yourself. So that's where my head is at when I'm.
your head's in the right place for this next part of the discussion, but I guess I do want to pause and just see if Jake or Bill or Ben or Bart have any quick questions or comments or reflections on Professor Tootle's either statement, if you read it directly, or what he's referring to today. Any quick comment or reflection?
Just how it resonated. I did read it when you posted it, and I don't know. It's hard to describe the impact, but I have this flood of memories of people who were impactful in my own life, family, friends of family. It's just it's overwhelming to think about. I mean, it's just there.
Yeah, and all the people who just poured love and time into you.
Right.
And there's nothing you could do to deserve that. So
No.
how do you move forward in your life and not carry that as a burden, but rather think of it as something that should, how is an obligation not a burden? It's something that will sustain you, not drag you down. It shouldn't send you into a spiral, but you can't deserve all of the things that were done on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
All of the goodness in the world is just as overwhelming as all the badness in the world, maybe more so.
Nice. Bart or Ben, Jake, last call. All right, you're off the hook. So, Professor, in that same tone and tenor, pretend you're America now. You're the undergrad history, master's and PhD in U.S. history. Now, you can't speak for America, but take us through some of your same reflections from our founding to our Civil War to some of the atrocities that we have as a country have done, the harm we've done to both other countries probably and to our own citizens. You don't have to give the whole history of the United States in the remaining 15 minutes, but in that context of Thanksgiving and grace and well, just apology and redemption. What should we be thinking about? Because I have an agenda here. I think there's a difference in, it's not necessarily political parties or liberal and conservative, but there is a distinction. A lot of people are really mad at America right now, or don't know what we stand for, or like hold it against the founders for this, or groups of people for that, and it seems like we're making a mistake, a cultural mistake in our country. So that's my hidden agenda. But I'd still rather you be in the context of your kind of personal life's view. Speak to us from a country. How have we been?
Well, I guess I'll start with what I started thinking about was a way that my older sister once shamed me when I was parenting. I think it was when my teenager was, I don't know if he was 1, 2, 3 years old, but he was doing something, and I was, especially with your first kid, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's a big deal and what's not a big deal. But I wanted him to behave, and my sister sort of leaned in and said something like, "Yeah, Otis, stop acting like a 2-year-old," and she wasn't saying it to him; she was saying it to me, reminding me like, this is what 2-year-olds do, like there's this is part of what a normal 2-year-old is going through, learning how to manage to be a human being. It's hard being an infant and having your brain try to process information and grow into an adult. And but at the same time, with your kids, there are things about your kids that are sort of normal, and there are things that are unique or different or extraordinary that make them special. And when you write in your diary at night, you don't usually write about the things that happened that were exactly like yesterday. And when I think about like America uh, in its founding and the arc or trajectory of American history, I sort of think about it like America was born into a world where human beings had kind of lived the same way for a long time. And so there were, and that is ruled by arbitrary violence, you know, that essentially arbitrary violence made all the decisions. And in all of the times when America or Americans were acting like every other country, it happened, and we should describe it and not deny it. But it also, you're losing sight of what is unique. You know, it's like saying if one of your kids was the world's greatest piano player, and you were writing a story about their life and all you recorded was how they brushed their teeth every day, you'd say, well, aren't you leaving out something important? You know, like everybody brushes their teeth, but this guy is the greatest piano player who ever lived. You know, if you're writing a biography of Mozart, you don't describe how he brushed his teeth, right? Like that's not the unique thing about Mozart. And thus, the times when America was acting like every other country is not what is unique about the United States. What makes the story of the United States so remarkable is how the pressures to be ruled by arbitrary violence are in constant conflict with the ideals of the founding. And you can't understand American history without understanding this constant contrast that's going on between this pull that human beings have towards living under arbitrary violence and these founding ideals. That is what is unique. Again, what was unique was not the fact that the United States had slavery. It was that we began noticing that it was wrong. And I don't say that is totally unique to the United States. The same thing was, the same intellectual currents were taking place in other countries. It just happened that the United States was founded in that revolutionary ideal. It wasn't just a couple of philosophers and trying to have influence within their existing political systems. You know, we were founded in a revolution about rights, and that is remarkable, and it is unique. And you're telling a lie about America if you're pretending that the only significant thing that happened was, you know, that Mozart brushed his teeth, to torture my metaphor even more.
So that's helpful. And we've had a variety of shows conversations where you've touched on that, but it's nice to hear you talking about it in this kind of setting. Let me take you slightly off course. Yes, I know there was another war, but we don't hate the English and Wales and Ireland and Scotland today, right? Somehow we've forgiven each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what's the deal with that? Did we forgive each other right away in 1778 or
No.
9? Or did it take a while?
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, I would say there was always a kind of affinity because of because there were so many relationships, but you know, we went to war with them again, War of 1812, and then a lot of the tension continued to exist well into the 19th century, and especially during the Civil War, when we had to settle a lot of the claims. We still had contesting land claims with the British, and then also, some British merchants were getting kind of cute with supporting the American rebellion. So we were upset with them over that, and it took some years for that to work itself out as well.
But a lot of people died on both sides in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and other skirmishes, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
But somehow we still are able to, as a culture, both cultures, get over it. And I don't mean to just get over it, because people died and lands were taken, and I mean, the wars were fought. But somehow we culturally just don't hate another culture forever, right?
Of course. Yeah.
But in some ways, you must see it in your Facebook friends and other situations where they go, if you're still supporting Trump, I want nothing to do with you. You're the scourge of America. Or if you're not supporting, or if you think Biden's not ruining America, then I don't want anything to do with you because you're part of the problem. It doesn't matter what the issue is. There's a lot of like deep-seated anger going on out there in the world, isn't there?
In fact, what's funny is I think my position is a little bit unique in that I don't see a lot of hatred in my interpersonal relationships. I don't see a lot of hatred in my social media feed anymore. Where I really see it and feel it is institutionally from my state. So if you want to know what I experience as angry and hateful, I would say it is my state government. Much more so than my social media or any of my friends or family members.
And do you hate them back?
Well, I don't know. It's difficult because it's an abstraction in some ways, and then there are human beings who are caught up in these hateful edicts, but their motivations are as complicated as each individual person. I mean, some people are just want power. Some people, are
want to salute the flag. Yeah,
well, I mean, we're just getting we're just inundated every year with new initiatives from the state that come closer and closer to requiring things of people that would require me to break oaths, asking me to do things.
We should probably do a whole show just on that. So I don't want to go too far.
Yeah. But if you're say, I mean, our hiring guidelines that are going into effect require us to discriminate on the basis of race, which is something that goes against my religious beliefs. It goes against my what I believe is my oath to the Constitution of the United States. It goes against what I consider the Constitution of California. And I'm going to have some moral questions depending on, because I've seen the language, but where do you draw this line? And how does your what is my moral obligation within this system that I'm a part of? These are all questions that I'm going to be grappling with in the coming years.
And there's a variety of those that we all, whether it's corporate policies or trade associations or political parties we belong to or not, there's all those kind of dilemmas. I still want to stick big picture for now, though. Is there any other major dilemma from the Revolutionary War up to the Civil War? Because it seems like that's the big one that, I don't know, maybe we're still fighting the Civil War, but is there anything else in there that we should be talking about as far as grace and forgiveness and redemption? I mean, did we end up double crossing France or anything? I mean, is there some other?
Well, I mean, I always, we lump this into many issues are lumped into the pluralistic balancing rights and the abuses that take place when we get these things wrong. So you could, in any given state, you could describe voting rights, you could describe women's rights, you could describe Native American displacement, treatment of various ethnic and religious groups within it, people who are, rich people, poor people. Everything's always being done incorrectly at all times. Our system is not designed to produce perfection. It's just designed to make things a little bit better. And so that means that we're always getting things wrong. So I would say that if you're looking at the negatives or what people need to be forgiven for, it has to be almost a never-ending process. Otherwise, decision-making in the system can't even move forward.
Right. And that's a really important distinction. I think that's nice. And it takes the personal to professional or individual versus societal. I think that's a nice bridge. But as far as big cultural ones, why didn't we just allow the South to say, hey, we could have been a country without the South, but if they really want to do that, we could have had two countries, right? That's happened in the history of the world.
No.
But we didn't. We fought a war.
No. And that was not an option.
Okay, explain that. I know we've had a whole conversation on it, but explain it a little bit, and then how we forgave each other when we decided it wasn't an option.
Oh, well, I don't know that's a separate conversation.
Right.
I guess conversation number one is, would it have been possible to simply let the South go? And the answer is no, because you would have, losing the American South would have destroyed the entire United States, because the entire United States was an experiment on whether or not human beings could govern themselves from reflection and choice. I saw Jake already posted Federalist 1 in the show notes. And when the rebellion began, the South was represented in Congress and in the presidency and in the Supreme Court. And what they were doing was not acknowledging they didn't like the election results. And then they were attempting to use violence in order to overturn election results and create a government based on racism and slavery instead of on equality. And so the destruction, letting the South go, as General Sherman said in his letter to Atlanta, we would reap the fate of Mexico, which is eternal war. What happens is, if you say in this club, if you don't like how things go, you can use violence and then leave. What happens is people use violence and then leave. And that's why the position of the United States is that we could never acknowledge that the rebellion was in any way legitimate, that the so-called Confederacy ever existed.
Okay, so and we've had a whole discussion on that. So and that's helpful in this context. And then we had it was brutal, right? Just plain brutal war.
Yes.
How do we forgive each other?
I'm not sure we did, because to truly forgive requires everybody to acknowledge what happened, and we've never really had a good reconciliation and an acknowledgement of what the American Civil War really was. The war has been so heavily politicized by people who hate America because they don't like big business and the founding, and then people who are Southern sympathizers who have attempted to rewrite the history. So I don't know. In some ways, we haven't had real forgiveness. What we have is ignorance. We have people who just simply don't remember and don't care what happened. And that's not really reconciliation. That's not really forgiveness.
Wasn't this 150 years afterwards?
Yeah. But I don't, when I talk to anybody about the Civil War, I almost never encounter anyone who actually, I don't mean understands, the troop movements and the calibers of the rifles and stuff like that. I don't encounter a lot of people who really understand what the Civil War was at a very basic level. And the people who care about it the most seem to get it the most wrong. So I would say that indicates we've got a problem. Maybe we've got lots of problems.
And that permeates all sorts of other modern discussions, not just critical race theory, but abortion and guns, and I mean it just transfers over all sorts of different issues in a flanking maneuver or a oblique way of talking politics. We're actually talking about other things, and we use other proxy battles to fight this fight. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always find it interesting, as I assign papers to my students, they have access to this thing called journal storage, JSTOR, and they can look at articles from, all the way back in American history, as long as there have been history journals. And one of the things that's funny is they often cite this really, really old article on the causes of the Civil War. And it was written in like the 1870s or 1880s. And I'm always struck by the fact that when I read that article, it's more accurate than anything that was written for another 120 years. And that shouldn't be that way. Theoretically, the history of the Civil War should have been getting better for the next 100 years, not worse. But with some obvious grand exceptions, if you're just trying to understand the basics of the causes of the Civil War, people who lived through it understood it better than history teachers later.
Interesting.
Which is
so my premise is flawed. That my premise is that we're a forgiving, or we should be, a forgiving, loving, graceful society. And yeah, maybe we are, but in some ways we block things out and we forget too. Right?
Yeah. Denial's more than a river in Egypt, as
Okay.
the joke goes.
All right.
Sometimes we just forget things.
Okay, let me jump up, since we're already in 35 minutes in. Let me jump up to a modern thing that I've been doing a lot of. I'm not soul searching because that's too melodramatic, but contemplating on. I don't think you've read this book, but I bet you're aware of the history in World War II, how we carpet bombed Tokyo with basically napalm, and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in Tokyo while they were sleeping. Burned huge sections, square miles of sections, and multitudes of bombing. And then we dropped 2 bombs on it. Do Japanese still hate us? Nuclear weapons, the only country in the history of the world that's used them in warfare so far. Do Japanese, do you think they hate us today?
No. But
how do they forgive us?
Well,
I know they started the war against us, but still, how do they forgive us?
I think, it's a difficult issue. You should probably have somebody on who's a better expert on modern Japanese politics. But in in the years after the war, uh, again, I'm really speaking outside my area of expertise, but my understanding is that there was a widespread understanding of the war as being a tragedy, uh, and also an acknowledgement that they started it, attacked us, and but I do know that there are political movements within Japan that have sought to kind of revise the memory of World War II. I don't know that it's gotten anywhere to where we'd say, oh, they don't remember it correctly anymore. But there's a lot of denial in Japan about World War II as well. I mean, Japan has never really truly recognized their atrocities against the Chinese people or the Korean people. Their government often denies the women who were enslaved from Korea and brought back to Japan. And you had all these embarrassing moments of, the government was denying that they ever did this, but these women are still alive and living in Japan, and they're, they're Koreans who were kidnapped. And so there is a lot of war denial there as well. It was not a perfect memory and reconciliation. And one of my old advisors, Jeffrey Herf, he's the expert in this area when it comes to Germany. He wrote a book called Divided Memory, and it was about how the Holocaust was remembered differently in East and West Germany in the years after World War II. So it's a robust field of study. I'm not an expert in it. I am aware it exists.
Speaking of Germany, do we hate Italians and Germans?
No, of course not.
Do they hate us?
I don't think so.
How about modern era? We're pretty irritated with the Russians invading a foreign country. Do we hate them?
No, I mean, I've been to Russia, and it's this is something that I guess everyone who travels outside the United States always experiences, is you realize like, oh, I love these people. I feel horrible for their government. Well,
how about the man? Do you hate Putin?
Yes.
But I mean, like, you'd like to see him assassinated or murdered, or I know it's not appropriate to talk about that. I guess we could get banned, but I mean, you hate him. He needs to be tried for his evil.
I wouldn't shed any tears. I wouldn't lose any sleep at night over his, I'm not a fan.
Okay, so we've got it down to one person. There's 7 billion people in the world, and we've got you pinned down on one person hating him. Okay, cool. I'm taking you from love everyone and pouring stuff into hating one guy. Big picture now, before we open it up to questions. What lessons can a history professor teach us on how to engage as a country? So you gave us the founding principles, which is unique, and that's something we should emphasize and not be distracted by the pros and cons and good and bad in everyday life. That we should, yes, there are issues and we need to be aware of them, but we shouldn't be distracted. But how should it guide us as a culture? What can you tell us, that somebody who doesn't have all this understanding of U.S. history, how can it change our daily engagement with others in politics and public policy and governance and community service and raising our families? I mean, what wisdom? You're coming down on high. Your students don't respect you, but we do. I assume your students respect you, but you have a different audience with us. How do we make a positive change in the world because of your wisdom?
Well, I guess I would just say that, I mean, you're a runner, right? And so how the world looks to you before you begin running. And if I were to ask you that same question after you had just completed a run, and the world looks different to you because you have changed your context and your perspective. And I would say the same thing for people who feel deeply about their, exercise or experiencing a piece of art in a fundamental way, attending a religious service. Each of these things gives you a context to be a better person, by reminding you, by just not letting you spiral into being overwhelmed. Context. And the study of history does the same thing. And I don't think any of those things on their own is enough. Maybe I hope that doesn't get me in trouble at church, but like that, that you need to spend time with real human beings. You need to do physical labor. You need to exercise. You need to breathe air outside and walk in grass. You need to attend a religious service. But I would also say, along with that, you need to read history books. It's as important as all those other things, because I don't care what the book is. I mean, the other day I just was looking up something, and I picked up this book on from the Penguin series, like History of Europe, the big series. And I'm not a European historian, but I just opened it to what I was looking for, found what I was looking for, started reading, and within 15 minutes, I was no longer the same human being that I was 20 minutes before, because I had the perspective of thinking about this particular passage was about a French conscript who fought in the Napoleonic Wars. And now I was thinking about my problems when compared to a French conscript in the Napoleonic Wars, right? It made me a different human being. It changed me in the way that art or religion or exercise or change you. And so studying American history, if I were to give you advice as to how you should do it, I would say read primary sources slowly and quietly, and only read good books, because there are enough good books that you'll never have time for the bad ones. I'm looking at right now a stack of 5 books that I have not read. And they're all good. And there's 20 more on the shelf behind me. I'm literally looking at this computer is stacked on 5 books, and out of these 5 books, I've probably read 30 total pages, and they're all great. They're not bad. It's just, so I would say just get all the bad books out of your life.
So now I want to do a transition with Jake asking a question, because you just posted on it, Jake. How to take a personal prescription, thank you, and turn it into a cultural, what is that word, where we all believe it, where we want to be better as a country, and we don't fight over silly things on Facebook. Or what we learned on Facebook and find out it's not quite true, but then maybe we go to a primary source, which was just a newspaper reporter who was mostly right, but then there's still another story, and then we all give up and go to the next little weird battle. Jake, what's your context or yours? You have an influence in people's lives. What's your frustration and question to the professor?
Well, it's not much of a question. It's kind of just a frustration. My students don't so I'm a high school social studies teacher. My students do not read books. They don't read history books. They don't read Harry Potter. They don't read anything. All of their information comes from social media. And I hear a lot of them saying, oh, I heard this about history from some random person on TikTok, so therefore it must be true because it got 1 million different shares on it. And it's like, that's cool. I too can lie on a massive social media platform and get a lot of reactions to it. And so I've tried introducing primary sources to my students in class, and they always say, we have no context for reading this. And then I respond, I gave you the context when I finished my lecture 5 minutes ago before I told you to read it. If you had paid attention to me, you would have had all of the context.
Yeah.
And so my issue now is, kind of going along with John's point, what do we do for the American populace at large who doesn't want to read and they want their information fast?
I guess I would just say, tell them that you can't have it fast. Like, one of my favorite expressions from Warren Buffett is, you can't have a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant. Like, there is no royal road to learning. I mean, this is 1,000-year-old bit of wisdom, right? There is no royal road. There is only time and work. That's it. And I would say, just one teacher to another, the hardest thing is not getting frustrated, not taking it personally. And just the same is true for teaching is true for learning. You just get them to take the next step, right? Like Theodore Roosevelt said, I care about the man who takes the next step, not the one who theorizes about the 200th step. So I assume that my students know nothing, and we start with words, then we do sentences, and then we do paragraphs. And once you can read a paragraph, the world is your oyster. But every class, it's like Groundhog Day. You have to forget, I don't know. I don't even know if forgiveness is even required, because they're not doing anything wrong. They're just acting like age appropriate kids. But you have to have a sort of built-in, you have to forget and pretend the next day like I'm walking out in front of a bunch of eager and engaged scholars who really want to be here, and act as if they like it. And the other thing is, I would say in every class there are always 1 to 5 students who are who want to learn, and I would say don't fall into the trap of creating your class around trying to get D students to get C's. The idea is that I'm teaching you how to get an A in this class, and I will only teach you how to get an A in this class. But you're not all going to get A's, but everyone who tries is going to learn. But you don't serve your students by shaping all of education around just trying to get D students to get C's. And but I would say you're absolutely right. I would start with a sentence, then a paragraph, then a comic book, and then from a comic book to a really short book. Short biographies are almost always the gateway drug. If you want to get someone actually interested in history, but you're right, because they're so used to not reading and getting everything so quickly, that sort of TikTok scroll. I mean, it's an addiction, and they essentially, you just have to take their phones away. There is no other answer, right? It's too compelling. It's too interesting. It's too fascinating. You will never be as interesting as their TikTok feed. In the same way that hiking is never going to feel as good as taking fentanyl, right? You can't compete with a drug, but at the same time, we realize what you get from hiking in the Sierras is good. What you get from taking fentanyl is bad. So don't try to say, oh, my class needs to be as interesting as doing drugs. It
So,
can't be.
Professor, extrapolate Jake's question with his students up to our contemporaries, because at least my contemporaries are smart and they have a variety of degrees, and some of them don't have degrees, but they're just as smart as the people that do have degrees. But I wanted to suggest that in any topic worthwhile, the border and immigration policy, to me, it actually seems fairly simple. We have to lock down the border more, and we have to give some kind of legal mechanism for the folks that have been here for decades. We got to kind of give both sides what they want. And it's crazy complex, that simplicity of how my problem solving. But if you look at how we talk about the issue, it's just stupid. I mean, I ended the sophistication of the conversation right there. The rest of it's just name calling. So
Yeah.
how do we become better citizens from a historian's perspective? And yes, we can, okay, read. And I like your story about how you read words and paragraphs and comic books and short bios. Cool.
Yeah.
But anything else?
Yeah. So if you're an adult, if you're a citizen, if you're a grown person who has a life and kids and whatever, my advice would always be, well, to listen to Calvin Coolidge's advice in Business and the Free Press, right? Of good information, you cannot have too much, but of propaganda, you can't have too little. So if you like movies, watch good movies. If you don't like to read, listen to good podcasts, but get good information in the format that you would like to have it. And do not, I guess I'd say, like, what to avoid more than anything else is anything that feeds your prejudices. And I know people really like Jon Stewart and The Daily Show and Trevor Noah and all this stuff, or even Bill Maher or whatever. But if you find yourself laughing at jokes that aren't funny, it's because he's saying something that you agree with so profoundly that you're just like, yay, you want that endorphin hit from somebody, being clever and agreeing with you. So if you are going to consume that kind of stuff, I would say just know that what you're doing is not good for you and limit it. Think of it like carbohydrates, right? These are the carbs and sugar. This is not the protein. Try and fill your diet with as much protein as possible.
Helpful. Bill, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a burning question here. I'll ask it for you to think about, Stephen, and then but let me tell you a little bit what's behind it. Listening to all of this, I'm prompted to ask, as a society, following John's lead earlier, have we been better with living with, I guess I'd call it, ambiguity in the past than now? And the reason I ask that is from a couple of angles. I'm reading John Meacham's book right now on Lincoln, his latest book on Lincoln. And I'm just struck by, like I think you kind of said at the beginning, how complicated, our lives are, and interrelationships and thoughts. And, there's this history coming together of what formed Lincoln and how he thought about things, but you can still cherry pick things in that come out of his life that could allow you to say, oh no, he definitely thought slavery was okay, for example. And I think of my own, in the context of your Thanksgiving note, and my own parents, friends, and so forth, it was pretty easy for them to say, when we got into issues, that they'd say, hey, it's complicated. There's, you got to look at both sides. It's, my own older son got frustrated with things being too complicated and turned to religion as a way to kind of provide a better guide, like you said, what to do when you have questions. So But now it's through social media and Twitter and sound bites. Politicians are motivated to come up with some statement that they hope 52%, will agree with them, and only 48% will hate what they say. Is this part of our difficulty? Is that we can't just sit back and say, yeah, it's complicated?
I think so. And there are probably, two things popped into my head with your question, comment. The first is you're right, and that is that if you do not have a religion, you'll replace it with something. And the decline in religious participation is probably a big factor. And the reason is not because religion turns you into an automaton. It's because, and I want to be very specific, that it's the religious practice that forces these things into decline. Because the practice of a religion, you are, at least on a weekly basis, provided with an opportunity to put your life in a spiritual context. Whether or not you choose to do it is, kind of up to you, but more people do it when it's a part of their weekly practice, especially when even people who attend religious services now don't, the religious life is kind of dominated by a faith practice that isn't based on long-standing doctrine. I don't want to, criticize evangelicals too much, but if you're just, getting a sort of like God is nice and a rock show, it's not really a part of an integrated theology that you're learning a piece of every week. So there's that. And then there's, another thing that has, that you made me think of, and that is that it's much more difficult to live and let live when other people's political beliefs actually can affect your life. And that has happened because of the growth of the administrative state over the last 100 years. So if you were to go back 100 years and say, well, live and let live, he's got his beliefs, I've got mine, you would say, okay, well, that's fine. But almost every part of our lives contains some part of it that has been many parts of it that have been incentivized by the federal government. So that means that other people's political beliefs mess with your life. So the mere fact that they hold a disagreeing opinion with you has the potential to affect your real life. And that was simply not true when the administrative state was not a part of our daily lives. In other words, I can say, oh, well, you don't like, public employee pensions, and you're entitled to your opinion on it. I'm entitled to mine. Well, now if you have that opinion, you're voting and you're affecting my money. Does that make sense? In other words, when we have a government that has provided it so many incentives and for the last century, what it has effectively done is it has made it more difficult to see people with differing opinions as being not a threat. If I'm a gay man and I get married and somebody wants to end gay marriage, if the federal government had no position on gay marriage, if there were no such thing as Social Security or laws about who could visit who in the hospital or rules and administration about inheritance and, court orders, if there weren't if there weren't tens of thousands of legal implications of your marital status, then one person's opinion on gay marriage versus another opinions on gay marriage, you'd say, oh, okay, well, you're entitled to that and it won't affect me one way or the other. But if the federal government is involved in all of it, it actually does affect you. So I guess I would say that, those two things are what I think of. The decline in religious participation and the expansion of the administrative state.
So is that to say that in large part, the expansion of the administrative state comes from our desire to eliminate ambiguity or uncertainty?
And it also robs us of, it absolves us of individual responsibility. We're no longer obligated to do things because we say, well, the government will take care of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think of, the roles of principals in schools, for example. When I was growing up, the principal had tremendous power over the students, and the parents typically backed him or her up. And now, you have situations where that power has been removed from the principal, and in some cases moved to law enforcement, which.
Yeah, and everything becomes the job of law enforcement.
Yeah.
I wonder when you're trying to tell someone who's thinking about a career in law enforcement, I want to pull them aside and say, congratulations, you now are responsible for everything. Everything is now your job, and you have to be perfect at it. And the same thing is true of, I guess I would say, teachers are often in this, put in this position as well. And as I see teachers in the classroom, I realize that the way that they structure their lessons is kind of based on fear. This is how you would teach if you're constantly just afraid of being fired, afraid of getting sued, afraid of, yeah, Jake, you're going through it now.
Well, no, because I teach at a private school. So if all of my students fail, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah. Well,
But-
except for wealthy people will start complaining and they'll say, what's wrong with this teacher?
Yeah. No, but Tootle, you told this story when I took your class at Ashland about you had gone to a party a couple years ago and you met this guy who was an English teacher at a high school. And you were talking with him and he told you, oh yeah, my class is reading of Mice and Men. And then you said, oh, that's fantastic. That's a great Steinbeck book. Your students can read it and then they can examine the different themes of the book. And then he stopped you and said, no, I don't have my students read the book because if I did, none of them would and they would all fail and I would lose my job. So I tell them what is in the book.
Well, no, it was worse than that. He would play the audio from YouTube of the book while they put their heads down on the desks. And so they were just listening to the book or pretending to, but it just was basically nap time. And he made it even more explicit. It's funny because tonight I'm going to the same party where that happened, where the guy told me that story. I wonder if I'll see him. But he said he would be fired if he required his students to read a book.
Well, we're not going to end the show on this because there's too much to contemplate.
In a
on
high
that.
school literature class, Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, this needs to be on a more hopeful note.
That was assumed. But before you give a more hopeful note, Bart and Ben, do you have any quick, that needs to be quick, questions or comments to the professor? They're both napping, listening to the audio. Ben, anything quick?
Just a quick comment in terms of something you said previous. We go through phases in terms of what we believe. When I first got started in the internet, it was like, oh, the internet's going to be the bane of everybody's existence. And now we've gone all the way from that to YouTube, to Twitter, to TikTok. It's all going to be the bane of everybody's existence. And eventually, I think we're going to come around to, we're back to books.
Yeah. Well, it turns out books work really well. They require imagination and focus. You can put yourself into it. The other thing that works really well and is audio, for a different reason. So audio books don't tend to work this way, but really good narrative storytelling works really well in an audio form. But I guess it works in different parts of the brain in different ways, but you can get a lot from listening to good audio content, apparently.
Like Toodle Talks on Spotify.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think about that sometimes because I wonder, is this compelling? And if I was listening, and I think about it like when we would traveling in a car with your friends, and I think, yeah, I would be interested in hearing these people talk about this stuff. So I try to give us a little grace when I think about how compelling this needs to be. This is what you should be listening to while you're cooking or doing something else.
Love that. Bart, you're going to be able to finish out before the last comments from the professor.
Okay. Mine is, I just have a comment that's kind of along the lines of Ben's comment. I think, I don't know if we're going to ever go back to books the way they were. We might. But I'm, one of the things I'm very thankful for, kind of is the fact that we have cultivated the media of podcasts, which is what we're doing here, but it's also, there are so many of them that you can listen to, and so many of them are good. And I know the professor has said this at times, that it's almost kind of an honor to sit there and listen to these people for an hour.
Yeah.
So, just a quick comment.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. I listen to these podcasts and I just think I'm so lucky to be able to listen to these people talk. They're so smart and they know so much. And I get to bet, they've done, I was talking to one of my friends who's a pretty prominent scholar. And I was asking him, he's working on this multi-volume his biography of Herbert Hoover. And I was talking to him about his kind of writing process. And he said, well, as you know, the writing process is the tip of the iceberg. The 20 years I spent researching and you just realize this guy's been going into an archive and studying for 20 years. The book is the tip of the iceberg. And then when you get to talk to him about it, is the tip of the iceberg. But you don't get to replace all of the work, right? That has to come first. And there's just no substitute for, as I used to say about my old advisor, Alonzo Hamby, when he would say something and I would say, well, I disagree with Professor Hamby. I'm wrong. I just haven't figured out how yet, because he knows a lot more than I do. And so I need to just defer to him. I just haven't figured out how I'm wrong yet.
Excellent. Well, my concluding remark for today's show, Professor, is that I was there was a young American, I think he's 23 years old, and plays for Bristol, I think, if my memory's right, but was asked by the Iran reporter about, well, how can you make any claims against, you don't even know how to say our name and you're challenging our system of governance, and what about blacks in America? And this young man just gave a very eloquent, short presentation that we're constantly improving. From he's traveled the world and he's met people, and most people are good, but we're a society based off improvement.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, isn't that we should be proud of that young man, not only for his sports playing abilities, but also he knows some sense of perspective that you've been talking about today. And I'm hoping in some little way we're able to get some perspective on major cultural issues of the day through our conversations with each other. So thank you for this. I think grace and forgiveness and redemption are all those, I think, are part of how we should deal with each other, both personally and as a civically. I think
And
we'll
that's
be-
always the hopeful part. You know, we talk about these structural issues that are long term and all that. But the other thing is to remind ourselves every now and then that we're human beings. And there are going to be trends and things that if we don't think about it, we're going to fall into these patterns and traps. But we can also just choose to start thinking about it. You know, because once you bring it towards your conscious, into your conscious mind and throw some brain cells and some morality and perspective on it, as human beings, we can make whatever world we want to make for the future.
Yeah, nice. All right, last call for a comment, or it looks like we're all pretty good for today. All right, Professor, thank you. Hopefully you'll do another show and a conversation another week or two. But we'll plan that in due time.
Excellent. It's good to see you guys. Glad we're
Pleasure, y'all.
almost all healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, see you soon. That's it for today.
Okay.